And the final last night took place between Real Madrid and Barcelona of the Spanish Super Cup, which is, I guess, our Community Shield. Now, the final took place in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, and it has done since 2019. My question for you is this, Ollie. 10 years ago, this would have been seen as completely unthinkable. Now Saudi Arabia are hosting the Spanish Super Cup. As we know, and as we've talked about in Not Another Sports Pod, this is part of Saudi's bigger expansion into sport. Heavyweight boxing, live golf, the WTA finals, the Italian Super Cup. I think there's some UFC. Everything is building towards the World Cup in 2034. Saudi Arabia's participation in hosting sporting events is not going anywhere. It's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And we can delve into the reasons behind that if you want. But my question would be, how long before we see a La Liga game played in Saudi Arabia? How long before we see an El Clasico La Liga game played in Saudi Arabia? Because this is testing the water. This is the La Liga hierarchy testing the water of playing the Spanish Super Cup final, which ended up being the El Clasico in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. So if that can happen, then the logical next step is for a La Liga El Clasico game to be played in Saudi Arabia. I'm not saying I like it or dislike it, it's good or bad, but that is what I believe will happen before the 2034 World Cup, probably before the end of the decade.
I mean, it will happen at some point, but football's still too tough to move around in the same way that we've seen the US sports kind of doing, I think, which is weird because obviously... I think because things like the number of games that are played now, there's a very intense schedule. There's so many midweek games, European competitions, etc. as well, means that it's more difficult to fly off to Saudi Arabia for a weekend, come back to a European game and not say that it's not affecting you. The difference is baseball's an odd one for me because we bring back that to the UK and that seems to be okay, but for something like the NFL, which is the one that has moved first and foremost regular season games to another country, that's easier. You've got a set structure of a week. The teams get an option of having the week off the following week, so it kind of works in that sense. Whereas, it's
gonna happen, Ollie. Like it's gonna happen, and I guess my question. My kind of thoughts on this is that people say, well, why doesn't it happen to the Premier League? The Premier League right now does not need Saudi Arabia. It's a global product that sells itself anyway. The Community Shield will not be played in Saudi Arabia. It can be played at Wembley. You still get the global eyeballs on it. The Premier League is a global product that can be hosted in where it's hosted at the moment. Doesn't need it. La Liga, and I would argue Serie A, actually need Saudi Arabia because they don't have the same global product that the Premier League does. So that is why I think La Liga and Serie A will be neck and neck to see who hosts a game in Saudi first. The reason I think it'll be La Liga, not Serie A, is because, well, La Liga fans, they don't travel, right? There's no away, there's no culture, there's no history of traveling away to follow your club in Spain. So I think you'll get less kickback in that way. And I just think the fans would kind of tolerate it a little bit more, would just kind of meekly accept it. If both El Clasico games, instead of being played at home, would be played in Saudi Arabia. I can see it.
I cannot see Spanish football supporters abiding in an El Clasico.
The Super Cup El Clasico is played there, Ollie.
The Super Cup is like but it kind of is. You described it as being like, the Spanish Charity Shield, and if the Charity Shield left Wembley, no one would really bat an eyelid. It wouldn't be like, mate,
if the Charity Shield was played in Saudi, that would be a talking point.
It wouldn't be it would be far less a talking point than a Premier League game or the FA Cup or League Cup final or something like that going. And the same way, like the things like the Spanish Super Cup, the Italian Super Cup have been so bastardized now as competitions because, as you mentioned, it's a 4-team competition now. It's not winner of the Copa del Rey and winner of the league. It's not the Coppa Italia winners and the league winners. And as soon as you start messing around with that, then the meaning of that tournament's completely lost because people aren't stupid and people understand, you're just doing this to have a 4-team knockout competition so you can have more games. Like, it's very obvious. It's just done for financial reasons. The uproar around changing things like the FA Cup, even in terms of having FA Cup replays, people were so annoyed at that, at losing FA Cup replays and third round replays, for instance. But we could probably manipulate the Charity Shield without too many people being too frustrated. And I think that's what you're seeing there. And that's why it's okay, because they're still kind of perceived as, well, this is just our friendly pre-season tournament that's now moved into the middle of the season. Like, it's been moved around, it's been expanded. Fine, send it to Saudi Arabia, we don't care. But you stick the Copa del Rey final in Saudi Arabia or a Super Clasico or, whatever. People will be cheesed off by that and there would be more uproar.
What you're saying, though, doesn't really follow the trajectory of what we've seen the last 5 years, right? As in, 10 years ago, it would be, or even 5 years ago, mate, when it all started, it would be kind of unthinkable that Live Golf or like the WTA finals, like the end of year women's tennis tournament is now played in Saudi Arabia. I mean, despite
people don't care about that as much as football. That's a problem.
There's no fact. The fans aren't the same.
Yeah, like sure, if you took Wimbledon out of Wimbledon, you'd have a problem. If you took the Australian Open out of it, but the WTA tennis finals, the ATP finals, they have no real standing sentiment with anywhere. Like, it was kind of nice when they had that the end of the season men's tournament, like the Royal Albert Hall and stuff like that, but there was nobody like, oh, this is the home of tennis. No one ever said that about any venue that was used. So you can shift that because there's no sentimental home to an iconic foundation of that. When you shift things that people actually care about and have a long-standing sentiment, that's when you get into trouble with fans getting cheesed off by it. And putting Real Madrid against Barcelona in the La Liga season and taking that out of a Nou Camp or the Bernabeu is something that Spanish football fans may be able to let a Super Cup go, but not that.
I mean, there's 9 years now between 2025, and the 2034 World Cup in Saudi Arabia. The only thing that's going to happen in those 9 years is there's going to be more and more and more sport in Saudi Arabia, fair? This, by the way, we talked about this on Not Another Sports Book, but for our newer audience, this is because the Crown Prince is essentially trying to diversify a economy which has traditionally been very heavily reliant on oil over the last 100 years, and it's a young growing population in Saudi, and they're trying to diversify the economy, get people jobs, trying to bring Saudi Arabia onto the modern commercial stage. So that's kind of the reason for that.
And we are big fans of what Saudi are trying to do.
Man, I love what they're doing out there, and I just think that, I'm a really big fan of the trajectory. It looks like a great place to work, by the way. And, I've got a few gaps in the freelance calendar. So, look, there's every chance that Wilson wins. Do drop me an email. Yeah. So I think I just think there'll only ever be more sport in Saudi. So what do you think will, if you don't think a La Liga game will happen, what about a Getafe against Villarreal or something like that? Do you think they could sneak that into Saudi?
Yep.
Something like that.
Definitely. Something like that.
But then no one cares about that, do they?
Villarreal against Valencia. Like, there'd be some frustrated sighs from Valencia fans, from Villarreal fans. But as, a global audience wouldn't go, there's something very wrong with that. I think they still actually would, to be honest. I think there'd be a lot of people that would say that doesn't sit right with me. But that would be more acceptable then. Yeah.
What about Italian football? Did the Italians just accept that the Italian Super Cup's played in Saudi Arabia, for example? Because that Italians strike me as, and my experience of Italian football is there is an away contingent that follow their clubs. There is a greater depth and connection to the football clubs and the community. So how did that fly?
It's the Super Cup. Like, it means something, but it doesn't mean a lot of things. The Coppa Italia, you get the beautiful bullseye on your shirt. The Scudetto, you get the Italian crest on your shirt. You win the Super Cup, you don't get anything. You don't get a label on your shirt or anything like that. It's just, okay, nice, well done. Because it was their pre-season tournament. All of these Super Cups were just a pre-season tournament and a piece of generic silverware. So moving it across, it just means less than it already did, and it never really meant that much. And changing it to this knockout stage competition and all that kind of stuff like the Spanish have done with it. But Italian football wouldn't tolerate a regular game going across to Saudi Arabia or anywhere like that. It wouldn't happen.
Ooh, this is going to be Ollie Wilson's second Alexander Isak moment of the season, I wonder.
When they announce that the Milan derby is going to be played in
Tamworth Tottenham's going to be played in Jeddah.
Look,
Right, let's talk
Tamworth
about...
sign them up. They'd be desperate for that.
You're not wrong.
No frozen pitches at this time of year in Saudi Arabia. I tell you, that is one big thing. I think the thing is as well is that Saudi's caught in a tough position with something like this because they have to bring the best across because people only care about the best. People don't go to a stadium and won't go to a stadium to watch Valencia against Getafe or Cagliari against Bologna or something like that. That will be an empty arena, which is why things like boxing you can put there, have the biggest fight in the world. Yeah, Formula one weekend. It's a travelling circus anyway, Formula One. That works, and it's the pinnacle of motorsport. You could only, I think, get an audience with maybe a mid-level Premier League game. A mid-level Italian, German, Spanish game.
Germany would never do it because of the club and the sort of fan ownership. But yeah, I take your point.
But no one turns up. And if no one turns up, then it's bad optics. And Saudi don't want bad optics. It's all about the optics. You need a full stadium. So it's like Messi or nothing, basically, for Saudi
Champions
Arabia.
League final.
That is more likely to happen.
I think that could happen before the 2034 World Cup. You could imagine the 2033 Champions League final, and it would be pitched as Saudi need to test this stadium before the World Cup and that kind of thing. I could imagine a Champions League final because it's a neutral venue anyway, so it makes sense. And that would happen in 2032 or 2033.
3 years earlier, you'll get the Europa League or Conference League final, and then you'll get a Champions League final.
Conference League kind of makes sense because if you're flying to Azerbaijan anyway, you may as well fly to Saudi Arabia down the road.